Hello, and thank you for joining Helaman's Army today. Today is another installment of the Consecration versus Communism discussion. Today, I am discussing George Albert Smith. But before I dive into George Albert Smith, I'd like to just make a quick observation, and it could just be simply that because I'm talking about communism and consecration and socialism that I'm starting to see it more often. It's like when you decide you're going to go buy a new car, and then you start looking at cars, and then the car that you're like, hey, that looks good, and then all of a sudden you start seeing people around them driving them everywhere. It's because you're suddenly noticing them because you've never noticed them before. Or maybe it's that you decided that you're going to go buy a yellow car, and then all of a sudden you start seeing yellow cars all over the place because you've never noticed them before. And that could be the case. But in the last little while, I have seen what I would call a marked increase in this discussion. And I will say that people are generally not on the side that I am on when it comes to following the prophet, when it comes to saying that, hey, socialism and communism are not the law of consecration. Because they aren't. And it's fascinating to me just to see this happen. And just because you throw democratic in front of socialism doesn't mean that it's any good. It still leads down the path, albeit at a slower rate. It still leads down the path towards taking away liberty and freedom. We can see that today in various countries of the world that have and even in the United States. But there are other countries in the world that have fully embraced this democratic socialism idea, where we're seeing freedom of speech is trampled regularly, due process is ignored, and we're starting to see that here in the United States as well. Not only in social media, but there's cases of due process being ignored in the United States. There have been, as of recent years, there have been cases of, obviously, cases that were tried of where there was no victim, the victimless crime, if you will, where and we're seeing that in the United States, and it's really an unfortunate thing, and it's because of this embrace of these ideas because of iniquity that we're seeing that happen. At least that's my opinion. So I just wanted to just point that out, that yes, I'm seeing a lot of these recently, and so I think that this is important. This discussion is important, although it's probably not going to be seen by many folks. The people who will see it will hopefully understand the need and the necessity for talking about it and for understanding it, because there really is a need for Latter-day Saints to understand this topic. I was on a message board where a member of the church was arguing proudly and loudly for democratic socialism, and ignoring any quotes from any prophets because he didn't like their politics. Well, that's not a smart idea. But if you want to ignore a prophet's voice, that's up to you. It's a warning for a reason. We get prophetic warning for a reason. And I think George Albert Smith, that we're going to talk about today, is kind of an interesting character for that particular reason. We saw from Heber J. Grant, we saw very direct prophetic warning. They were warnings, do not do this. Heber J. Grant, it's not so much as a warning as it is an action. So Heber J. Grant was a man of action far more than anything else. And he was very difficult to study, to find his connection on this particular topic, because he never mentions socialism or communism in any of his General Conference talks. He never mentions the United Order. Matter of fact, I even had a difficult time finding anything specific to tithing. Although he does talk about tithing in short bursts. Back then they didn't have like a talk dedicated to tithing. It was, I'm going to talk about this, and then I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to talk about this. But it was very difficult to kind of nail down George Albert Smith on this topic, because it wasn't his words that spoke, it was his actions. And so I had to do a lot of digging and a lot of studying on this. So with George Albert Smith, I think in order to understand his stance on socialism and communism and on these ideas where you get something for nothing, I think we need to start with who he was, and we need to learn a little bit about him. So in the Improvement era, May of 1951, he had a personal creed. This was just stuff that he lived by, and it was published in this Improvement era. My creed: I would be a friend to the friendless and find joy in ministering to the needs of the poor. I would visit the sick and afflicted and inspire them a desire for faith to be healed. I would teach the truth to the understanding and blessing of all mankind. I would seek out the erring one and try to win him back to a righteous and happy life. I would not seek to force people to live up to my ideals, but rather love them into doing the thing that is right. I would live with the masses and help them to solve their problems, that their earth life may be happy. I would avoid the publicity of high positions and discourage flattery of thoughtless friends. I would not knowingly wound the feelings of any, not even one who may have wronged me, but would seek to do him good and make him my friend. I would overcome the tendency to selfishness and jealousy and rejoice in the successes of all the children of my Heavenly Father. I would not be an enemy to any living soul. Knowing that the Redeemer of mankind has offered to the world the only plan that will fully develop us and make us happy here and hereafter, I feel it not only a duty, but also a blessed privilege to disseminate the truth. George Albert Smith. So this creed, I think, gives us a really good insight to his understanding of the law of consecration. Like I said, he didn't talk much. He didn't talk really any about. He didn't talk at all about the United Order, about the law of consecration, or about socialism or communism. Not once at all. And matter of fact, actually, I have enough sources here that it was kind of hard to nail them all down. But his creed really kind of pulls together this consecration idea, because everything he does is consecrated, right? If you read through that creed again, you'll see it all consecrated. Now I've taken a nice big screenshot of this creed, a nice big size picture, and I will publish it. I'll have it set to be published on the same day that this video goes live at the same time, so that you can go, if you want a picture of this creed in a picture format, you can go download it off. I don't know. Can you download pictures off of YouTube? I don't know if you can. I'll upload it somewhere else and put a link to it. Okay, so in General Conference, let me switch. Now I got enough General Conference talks that, yeah, and they've all got they all look the same, but they're all kind of different here. I don't think I picked the right one. Nope, that is the right one. Okay, so this is, like I said, he didn't talk about consecration or communism or socialism or United Order or any of that, but he did say this. This is October of 1916. George Albert Smith, he's not the prophet yet. He's an apostle. But he says, I feel today that we ought to be very grateful that our lot has been cast under such favorable circumstances. When we look around and see the conditions of our kinsfolk in many lands, when we see our brothers and sisters in the various portions of the earth without the truth, we ought indeed to feel that we are willing to dedicate our lives to the service of the Lord in return for the blessings that we enjoy. So that I believe makes it very clear about consecration, that we need to be willing to dedicate our lives to the service of the Lord because of the blessings that we enjoy. And I agree with him on that one. We do need to be dedicating our lives to the Lord. So let's go on to the next one. Hopefully I can find that's the right one. Look at me. I'm on a roll. The Improvement Era. This was November 1947. So before I get into this, so George Albert Smith, he became the prophet right at the end of World War II. And so Heber J. Grant had been the prophet for 20 plus years, and he had done. I mean, he was a very outspoken man, very clearly, obviously not excited about socialism or communism, as we learned in the last video about Heber J. Grant. And so George Albert Smith comes in right just at the end of World War II, and his response is markedly different than Heber J. Grant. He's definitely his own man, but the way that he led the church was very, very interesting and very charitable. So right at the end of World War II, if you remember, there was a part of the armistice that was created East and West Berlin. So the Russians took the east side, the Allies took the west side, or United States and the United Kingdom took the west side, and later there was the wall built. But in the meantime, anytime there was war, there always followed, and there still does to this day, whenever there's war, there always follows pestilence and famine every single time. And that's what they were experiencing in Europe at the time. So let's go on here to the Improvement Era, November 1947. So they were struggling with getting enough resources for the people. So this is right before this is December, where most people are trying to save up all their money for Christmas presents and Christmas. So keep that in mind as you read through this. He said this was a special fast day set by the first presidency. Said, we exhort every man, woman, and child claiming membership in the church to give cheerfully on the regular December fast day, one fast out of the 12 regularly held during the year, as much as he can possibly spare from his own needs. And in judging his needs, let him remember how much more he has than have the European sufferers. So he's really doing his best to help in a very charitable, compassionate way those folks in Europe who have been through this war. And there's not a lot of sympathy towards the Germans at this time in history, because it's they were the aggressors in the war, but the people who were still living there was a lot of them that were members of the church, and so his goal was to take care of them the best he could. And so we learn about this actually in General Conference in October 1947. So in this General Conference, he shares an experience that he had. Said, word comes from our people in Europe. In many cases, they are still having difficult times, but they are faithful, in the main, to God and the church, and the messages that they send us from time to time in expressing gratitude for food, clothing, and bedding we have sent them warm our hearts. It may be of interest to you to know that since World War II closed, more than 75 major carloads of food and clothing and bedding have been shipped across the sea to those needy people over there without any expense to them whatsoever. So this is, and that's the charity, that's the consecration. This is we're going to give whatever we can to the needy, and we combine that with our fast offerings, that was asked to be a very generous, everything that we can give up, then please do. So we combine that with this visit to President Truman, and we're going to hear about this again later. I've got another edition that I'll share with you, a special one, because this video is going to be slightly different. He said, when the war was over, I went representing the church to see the President of the United States. When I called on him, he received me very graciously. I had met him before. And I said, I have just come to ascertain from you, Mr. President, what your attitude will be if the Latter-day Saints are prepared to ship food and clothing and bedding to Europe. He smiled and looked at me and said, well, what do you want to ship it over there for? Their money isn't any good. I said, we don't want their money. He looked at me and asked, you don't mean you're going to give it to them? I said, of course, we would give it to them. They are our brothers and sisters and are in distress. God has blessed us with a surplus, and we will be glad to send it if we can have the cooperation of the government. He said, you are on the right track, and added, we will be glad to help you in any way we can. I have thought of that a good many times. After we had sat there a moment or two, he said again, how long will it take you to get this ready? I said, it's all ready. The government, you remember, had been destroying food and refusing to plant grain during the war, so I said to him, Mr. President, while the administration at Washington were advising the destroying of food, we were building elevators and filling them with grain and increasing our flocks and our herds, and are now what we need is the cars and the ships in order to send considerable food, clothing, and bedding to the people of Europe who are in distress. We have an organization in the church that has over 2,000 homemade quilts ready. The group that sang for you this morning, the Singing Mothers of the Relief Society, represent that organization. They had 2,000 quilts made by their own hands, ready to ship. The result was that many people received warm clothing and bedding and food without any delay. Just as fast as we could get cars and ships, we had what was necessary to send to Europe. So that's the big story with George Albert Smith, is that he was prepared, he was ready to go. That his charity, the charity of being prepared for the charity, started well before the necessity was apparent. And there's some really cool stories out there about this particular situation and about us sending aid over to Europe. And one thing I'd like to point out now in this video, although it'll be a subject in a later video, is that the person that George Albert Smith sent over to foresee or watch over or be the steward of handing out all this charity was Ezra Taft Benson. And that plays a major role in Ezra Taft Benson's view of this particular subject. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. I actually have a fantastic video. Believe it or not, I'm actually going to share a video with you. So it'll basically recount what I just read to you, but there's a nice little addition to it. So let's sit back and watch that.
The first line of George Albert Smith's creed states, I would be a friend to the friendless, and find joy in ministering to the needs of the poor. This belief was never more thoroughly demonstrated than in the time directly following World War II. In April's General Conference of 1947, President Smith shared the following conversation he had had with President Harry Truman.
I said, I have just come to ascertain from you, Mr. President, what your attitude will be if the Latter-day Saints are prepared to ship food and clothing and bedding to Europe. He smiled and looked at me and said, well, what do you want to ship it over there for? Their money isn't any good. I said, we don't want their money. He looked at me and asked, you don't mean you're going to give it to them? I said, of course we would give it to them. They are our brothers and sisters and are in distress. God has blessed us with a surplus, and we will be glad to send it if we can have the cooperation of the government. He said, we will be glad to help you in any way we can. How long will it take you to get this ready? I said, it's all ready, Mr. President. While the administration at Washington were advising the destroying of food, we were building elevators and filling them with grain and increasing our flocks and our herds. And now what we need is the cars and the ships in order to send considerable food, clothing, and bedding to the people of Europe who are in distress. The result was that many people received warm clothing and bedding and food without any delay. Just as fast as we could get cars and ships, we had what was necessary to send to Europe.
I just talked. I hope you enjoyed that video. I think it's pretty awesome to be able to just throw a video right in the middle of my video. I think it's pretty great, as long as I turn on my microphone afterwards. There was one story that I ran across about this particular situation where they're sending aid to Europe after World War II. That was pretty moving. But the source on it was a book that I don't have access to, and I'd like to verify that before. I'd like to verify before I share that source. But basically, the story was that they had gone over to give out some aid, and they went and visited some members of the church. And there was one single lady. Her husband had been killed in the war, and she was living in this attic of this building that was very drafty, very open. It was very, very difficult to keep it warm. They had no heat, and they had very little in way of clothing. And basically, her kids were just freezing to death. And so they gave her as much as they could, blankets and clothing. And he made it clear. He said, "Look, if we hadn't have found them and given them those necessities, those blankets, the clothing, then they probably wouldn't have made it for a few, through the night. They may have not made it even, very much longer at all." So it was really interesting as I dug into George Albert Smith to run across some of these. So the next part that I'm going to talk about is General Conference. It's all right, I've already got it up here. This is 1948, and this is just a follow-up to this effort to get things, to get all this to get all this charity sent over there. He said, "They have done a fine piece of work, but it is only partly done, and we will have to continue. And unless we are willing to continue, we can hardly go to the Lord and say, 'Heavenly Father, give us a bountiful harvest.' They are all his children. They need us. They need not only our moral support and our religious teaching, but they need food and clothing and bedding and help of all kinds, because in many cases, they haven't anything left." If you could see some of the letters that have come into our office from some of the poor people over there, it would wring your hearts. People who have been taken away from their homes with the idea that they were going to be allowed to settle elsewhere, and all of a sudden deserted, and then when they returned to their homes, found them pillaged and robbed of what they had, everything, and left helpless, with no place to go. So it was a pretty rough time period. We haven't got, we haven't experienced something like this in the United States currently. We haven't been pushed out of our homes because of our religion like the early saints were. We haven't had to try to put everything back together after a big major war on our soil. So there's times when you just need to give and give and give, and it's going to hurt if you just keep giving. But that's what his message was that we need to give and give and give, give all we can. Okay, so the next source. Let's see if I pull the right one up here. Not that one. This one, The Improvement Era, from July of 1948. So in this one, This was some warning signs. It was written by President George Albert Smith. And just this little section right here. The very fact that so much money has been made available to so many people gives the youth, in some instances, the feeling that because money comes relatively easy, honest toil is not necessary or desirable. And yet I am satisfied that no people have ever lived upon the earth who, having failed to earn their livelihood by integrity and industry, have not gone to decay. If our children grow up in idleness, we know that this is displeasing to the Lord. So when it comes to getting something for nothing, we know that that is not a godly attribute. We know that it is by the sweat of our brow that we will eat. This is a blessing and a curse. It is both. That this idea that we can just have the government give us stuff is an idea that comes from iniquity and comes from idleness and laziness. This idea that if the more we give to the government, the more they control, and the more they control, the more liberties we lose. It's just that simple. And we're seeing it very clearly, very openly, very brazenly. Certainly recently we've seen it very brazenly when it comes to censorship has been obvious. It's to the point where it's very clearly obvious. They're not even hiding it anymore. And so it's if we don't start just opening our mouths and talking, then we will eventually lose the right to the freedom of religion. There will be the freedom from religion, which is already very clearly expressed in the schools and in their no prayer in schools ruling in the Supreme Court, which was unfortunate. So we don't have a freedom of religion. But you can have a freedom from religion in schools. And you'll see the same thing. You'll see the same thing on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, on all of those, every social media site. And then the one social media site that allows for free speech is so brazenly and blatantly hive mind evangelical Christian that it's very difficult to post anything without getting a dog pile from everybody. So it's we're finding ourselves in a rough place, especially as Latter-day Saints. So I would highly recommend that we just start opening our mouths and start talking, because it's really the way that we have to fight this loss of liberty. It's clear to me, at least, and the reason we're seeing this loss of liberty is because we keep giving the government more stuff. We keep allowing them to take more and more and more with every little bite-sized little bit that they've taken over the last 100 years. We've seen so much disappear, and with all the social programs, we see far more disappear. So I'm going to end this video in a different way than I normally have. I'm not going to bear my testimony. Instead, I will let you listen to George Albert Smith's testimony.
No other people have what we have. I don't know of any people who ought to be so anxious and willing and grateful to be able to celebrate this day that is recognized in the world as the anniversary of the resurrection of the Redeemer of mankind, and that meant the opening the grave for all humanity. The Lord may bless us that we may be worthy, because of our lives, to keep this testimony, that not only we, but all that we can contact may receive that witness and carry it to our brothers and sisters of all faiths and creeds, and particularly to the descendants of Lehi, until we've done our duty by them. And then I'm sure that when that time comes, that we are celebrating the anniversary of the first resurrection. But when that great time comes, and when all who are in their tombs are worthy shall be raised from their tombs, and this earth shall become the celestial kingdom, and Jesus Christ our Lord will be our King and our lawgiver, That's what the gospel teaches us. That's what the gospel offers to us if we'll accept it. And I pray that we may be worthy of it. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.